Welcome to the Bullwhackers. This is third podcast. I'm here with Greg, and I'm Mike. And today we're going to talk about the word of the wise. What do you got, Greg?
Well, our guest today, Pete Schweddy. Now, the word of the wise today is cockalorum, Mike. That's Cockalou. Ourum.
Cockalorum.
Cockalorum. Now, this is cheating because you already know what the definition of cockalorum is. But would you care to venture a guess that would not be accurate? That would be something that somebody might just think of randomly when they hear the word cockalorum.
Well, if I heard the word cockalorum, I would say it probably represents something of the male side of this equation. But what is cockalorum?
Yeah, like maybe like a rooster.
Yeah.
Maybe decorum.
Right.
Patterned after a rooster. I don't know.
Well, and you usually hear something like cockpit, and that originally was specific to, a bunch of pilots in a small space. But what is cockalorum?
Cockalorum, surprisingly enough, is related to the male species, and it means a small, haughty man.
Haughty?
Now, that's not Hottie.
No, that's Hauty, right?
Haughty.
Are you sure about that?
Yep.
All right.
And so, haughty is self-important, sneering, cavalier. Yeah. So it's kind of like your typical small man's disease, but on steroids. So, cockalorum. That is the word of the wise.
I can honestly say I have not heard that in a phrase, I think, ever.
I'm here to please, Mike.
I figured.
I am here to please, and I would
figured you were on
venture a guess
fine
that
Friday.
some of our snollygosters are in fact cockalorums.
Now you're tying it all together.
That's right.
I see what you're doing there.
Yeah.
So a little bit of pop culture for you.
Okay.
I found these and I couldn't stop laughing. So apparently in this merry year of 2019, they have festive beard lights. And apparently they're getting ready for the next season by having these little lights in your beard, and they're by a company called Firebox. They're only $14 due to phenomenal global demand, according to their website.
Phenomenal global demand.
Phenomenal global demand.
Is there another kind?
I don't think so. Not if you're talking about festive beard lights.
Or about global demand?
There you go.
Global demand is in of itself phenomenal.
This is true.
There's actually global demand for water. So you could say the festive beard lights are on par with water. Air.
Yes.
So are you going to grow out your beard and give these festive beard lights a whirl?
No, I'm not. Because they didn't look like anything I'd want in my beard. But perhaps a cockalorum would like to have festive beard lights.
Oh, yes. Any cockalorum with a beard would want.
If they're haughty, as in Haughty, I would say they'd want festive beard lights.
But if a haughty cockalorum had festive beard lights in his beard, he would be a Hottie cockalorum.
This is true. So, the other day I was driving down the road right near where we are, and I kid you not, a wolf ran right in front of my truck. So I thought we could talk a little bit about the wolf in Montana and a little bit about the introduction in Yellowstone and just talk about some of the impacts, some of the positive effects that that's had. Because I think you're probably similar to me as far as coming across wolf tracks, might not necessarily have seen wolves, But I could not believe the other day I literally saw a big wolf run right in front of my truck.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
It's only the second wolf I've seen in Montana.
So where was the other?
The other one was over there by Garrison Junction, running across a field. I was just driving by. But I looked over and I went, "That's not a dog." Well, it's a dog, but it's a gigantic wolf.
Yeah. What color was it?
Black, all black.
Really?
Yeah. This one was the one I just saw was a timber wolf. Gray kind of
Gray.
prototypical wolf look to it.
Wow. Yeah, I don't believe I've seen any outside of Yellowstone. But one time we were all down there, and Andrea and I and the kids, and we pulled over because there were some people watching something, and in the distance there was a really large grizzly bear eating off of some killed animal, like a elk or a moose or something, and slowly, one by one, out of the tree line from all different sides came a pack of wolves.
Wow.
And they came down, and there was a white one that seemed to be the out. Well, yeah, that, but also the decoy, if you will. And then
I see.
And then there were several gray ones. I do remember there was a black one, but it was like watching a PBS documentary. These wolves were coming down, and one would get close, and the bear would turn around, and you could see the bear open its mouth, but we were so far away we couldn't hear a thing.
Did you have binoculars or anything?
Yeah, we had like a camera or something. I can't remember what it was, but we were looking through something, and it was just amazing. Yeah. And the wolves eventually left because that bear just wasn't having it. But
well, one of the interesting things I found out, because I just was curious about this wolf reintroduction into Yellowstone, the effect on the ecosystem, and the original species, or genus of wolf that was in Yellowstone was not what they reintroduced. So the original species was Canis lupus eremotus, something along those lines, and then they introduced in the 90s the Mackenzie Valley Canadian wolf, and that's Canis lupus occidentalis. So the interesting thing there is that they believe, because they don't quite know 100% because they have never found the original wolf genus that was there, but they believe that the Mackenzie Valley Canadian wolves were larger and more powerful than the ones that were already in the Yellowstone ecosystem.
Which makes sense, because I saw a clip on YouTube recently where some wolves were pursuing a small herd of bison, and the narrator of the short video clip said that the bison were larger than their relatives to the south, and that the variety of wolves that were there were the largest. And I think he called them timber wolves.
Probably.
But yeah, that's sounds about right.
Because the original extirpation, that's another fun word that I learned, essentially wiping out of all the wolves in Yellowstone's boundaries, was in 1926.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And immediately following that, the elk population exploded because nothing was predating other than bears and maybe the occasional mountain lion on the elk, and they overgrazed all of the aspen and willow stands. And particularly the interesting idea that I saw was that the willow stands were down by the rivers, and when they wiped those out, the beaver population got impacted. The rivers started going in different places because they weren't being kept within their banks, and they really started having a significant impact, because when the wolves were extirpated or done away with, then the coyotes filled that gap. And the coyotes were they were smaller, so they were predating more on beaver and those types of things. So the beavers couldn't, have their population stay as it needed to keep building dams and creating ponds and other things within the ecosystem. So they finally decided to reintroduce those wolves back in 1995, but they were the wrong genus.
So the correct genus to reintroduce would have been which one?
That would have been the Canis lupus eremotus.
Okay.
And that they at least know what genus it was that was there. I don't believe they, thought of that when they reintroduced the timber wolves. But the timber wolves, they have a tendency to be able to pull down bull elk and moose, and they're a lot stronger and a lot more powerful. Even bison, they can pull down small, calf bison.
So these are smaller wolves, closer to like the wolves from Mexico, maybe, or
right.
Okay,
yeah.
Interesting. So yeah, it'd be the difference between an African lion and a mountain lion.
Exactly. I mean, it's equivalent to that. And it's interesting too because, the more you read about why they reintroduced the wolf species into the Yellowstone ecosystem, it took a long time for them to make that decision. And it was fought, of course, by various people. The interesting thing that I found out was not only did the Wyoming Farm Bureau fight it, which you kind of expect from a lobbying body, because that would impact the domestic animals that the ranchers have that are outside of the park. However, they're right next door to the park.
Right there.
But then there's also a coalition of environmental groups. It included the Idaho Conservation League and the Audubon Society, which sounded odd, but they fought that as well, and those two cases were thrown out on, of all things, my birthday in January 3rd of 1995.
And on January 3rd of 1995, you probably turned
don't even
62,
go there.
Maybe?
No, I was a cockalorum at that time. So,
yeah, nicely done. Interesting. Yeah, and in reading up a little bit on wolves and how they're introduced to areas, it happens in a lot more areas than people understand. I don't remember the name of the island, but there's an island in one of the Great Lakes where wolves were introduced long time ago, the 50s or 60s, I think. And
isn't it like Grand Royal Island?
Yeah, something like that.
Royal, I don't know, something like that.
And Isle Royale, maybe. And these wolves were there to deal with the moose. And then those islands haven't been able to support them very well, so they've had to bring back more wolves because they're dying off. It's just really fascinating, the constant cycle of wolf management in the States and elsewhere.
Well, and it's also interesting how fast the population explodes when you have, wolves in one particular area, and you're hoping that they stay relatively there, but they don't. They just keep on migrating outwards.
Yeah, how do you get a pack of wolves to just calm down and just kind of stay in the same spot?
Yeah, I mean, in 2005, they took a survey and they approximate that 325 wolves were in Greater Yellowstone. By 2018, there's like 980 total in both Montana and Wyoming. It's spread out all over the place.
What about Idaho?
In Idaho, they had 565 wolves in 2005, and then in relatively 2016, perhaps, they have about 786.
Good grief.
And now they're finding it spreading everywhere. So the wolves aren't staying in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. They're spreading into Colorado. They're spreading into Washington State, Oregon, California.
Yeah.
I think you read there was a wolf population down in California.
Yeah, Lassen County, down not too far from where I grew up, and there's an actual pack down there, and they roam around Lassen Park, which is one of two monster dormant volcanoes in Northern California, and that's awfully close. And they have documented instances of predation where wolves were blamed for killing livestock in western Lassen County, California, which is really not that far from the Sacramento Valley. Lots of agriculture, lots of people and activity. So, and then the other interesting part I heard about was a wolf documented to be right on the Oregon coast in the far southwestern corner of Oregon. That's a long ways from Yellowstone.
It very much is.
And a lot of ground to cover, but yeah, it's just mind-blowing to think about how much ground these large predators can cover. If you think about a grizzly bear, just walking along, anyone who's seen one of those walking through Yellowstone or anywhere else, it's easy for a grizzly bear to walk 5 miles an hour and simply not get tired. And you think about doing that sun up to sundown for 2 or 3 weeks straight, that thing has traveled miles and miles and miles. You're looking, especially here where the sun is out for so long, get tired, and that's 50 miles if it wanted to.
Well, and you look at wolves in either Idaho or Montana. To get to Washington State, you're going to have to cross 2 different mountain ranges.
Some highways.
Probably.
Interstate.
Interact with ranchers and farmers along the way.
Yep.
It's fascinating to see how much they... Now, in California, do you know if they were also, the ranchers and farmers, were they offset by any losses of their domestic sheep by, the fund they put together?
I don't know. I didn't read that part, but it was U.S. forestry biologists, I think, that had confirmed it was a wolf kill. So I imagine, the federal program is going to be far-reaching enough to cover anywhere. Who knows if California's got a program set up yet? But yeah, there's money involved, but it takes a long time to get the payment, and anyone would just understand that these ranchers and farmers would just rather have their animals than have to deal with filing a claim and sitting around waiting for the check to show up at the mailbox.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I think wolves get into domestic populations and go on like spree killing, where they're not necessarily eating the domestic livestock, they're just wiping it out.
Right. And there are plenty of documented cases where that happens. We talked before, and in 2009, there was an article in the Helena paper that I read where just outside of Dillon, which, anyone can check out on a map, but it's between the Idaho state line and Butte, but there was a farmer or rancher down there who had his sheep grazing in the mountains in the summertime, and went up to check on him. One of his kids did, I think, and found 120 of the animals just slaughtered, just spread out all over these pastures and mountainside. And a lot of these animals were extremely rare, expensive breeds of sheep. And
so like specific types of sheep.
Specific types of sheep that were quite valuable. And obviously in it for a lucrative business, sounds like, and the wolves just didn't care. They hadn't fed on the carcasses. It looked like they had just non-discriminately just run through and just slashed with teeth and chased animals and moved on with their day.
I mean, on the positive side, based off of the wolves being introduced in both Idaho and Yellowstone, the elk populations were reduced by, they suspect, around 50%.
So that's interesting. I mean, that's positive, because when the wolves were whacked back in 1926, the elk populations exploded.
Right.
So it'd be interesting to know by how much did they increase. If an elk population goes down by 50%, if before that it had exploded and numbers were quite high, then it's not as detrimental as a lot of these hunting groups want you to think.
True.
The numbers are way down, and anytime you have a population that's not sustained, you're going to have unhealthy animals, and you're going to have sickness and problems.
Well, and I think the interesting thing was when the elk populations were impacted by the wolves that were reintroduced, they tended not to go down into those willow groves and the aspen groves. They tended to head, further up into the forest, where they naturally would have been, not necessarily, in those groves, but it also impacted the outfitters that were outside of the park. And those outfitters, they were seeing a huge reduction in the amount of elk hunting permits, because the biologists were trying to figure out, well, what was the impact on the elk population?
Yeah, economic impacts galore. You know, Montana's known for bringing a lot of revenue in from out-of-state people, in-state people, hunting and using those guiding services and getting hotels and airfare and meals at restaurants and sporting goods and all kinds of things, tips at restaurants. Anything you can think of can be affected by simply an elk population decreasing. Interesting stuff.
The other positive was that they, when the wolves came in, they started reducing the coyote population. And then when they reduced the coyote population, the fox population started to come back up. And so did the beaver population. So in a way, it somewhat balanced the ecosystem out. But it's interesting, too, because you also have those other ramifications of wolves leaving the park or leaving central Idaho and spreading out all over the place, where they could potentially have a significant bigger impact.
Yeah, true. And those other animals, they're not just sitting around respecting everybody's chickens and turkeys. Foxes and coyotes are famous for plundering and destroying chicken coops and getting into all kinds of problems. So it's not just the wolves. What I thought was really interesting was in 2018, I read an article from 2018. I think it was in the Billings Gazette, where they talked about grizzly predation of livestock had more complaints associated with that than with wolves. And so I'm not sure what to make of that. I'm not sure how valid that is, but the grizzly population is definitely branching out from the Rocky Mountain front. They're starting to go out into the plains. They're all over the place. And just north of Helena, there's a lot of those bears and a lot of cattle. Yeah. And they don't necessarily mix.
No.
Especially when the springtime and everything's hungry.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because I think other apex predators besides wolves are starting to figure out how do they impact the wolf population. There was this documented mountain lion that was down in the Bozeman area that was somehow figured out how to bite the skull of a wolf and literally kill it immediately. And so that cat was taking out wolves in different places. And then you wonder if that is going to become learned behavior in other cats and see if they can start reducing the amount of wolves.
It's just like a cat pulling something silly like that. Can't trust them. You can't trust oil gauges, and you can't trust cats.
Well, this is a big cat.
Yeah, but they're still cats.
Well, that's true.
They lounge around. They're lazy, good-for-nothing things. They just kind of sit in the sun all day licking themselves, and then they sleep a lot, and then at night they wake up and cause all kinds of havoc and chaos. Keep their owners up all night long.
They're all about that.
Or at least the people who think they own the cat.
True.
And the cat actually owns the people. Yeah, it's great.
So in other news from Montana and Wyoming, I thought it was relevant given the Yellowstone National Park aspect to the wolf discussion we had. But these are questions that out-of-state visitors to Yellowstone National Park ask. Now, I know that there's a lot of these that are probably made up.
Staged, if you will.
But I thought these were actually probably true because they're pretty funny. So one of them was, I saw a bunch of bison crossing the river. Do they eat fish? Somebody thought bison ate fish. Bison do not eat fish. What are those red dogs chasing the bison around? Well, those are bison calves.
True. And there was that story about people, quote unquote, rescuing the unfortunate bison calf. And I think that's a great idea. If anyone out there goes to Yellowstone, definitely try to grab one of those babies and throw it in your car.
The best one was the picture of the bison calf in the back of a minivan where they had lifted up the bison calf and put it in the minivan.
Right.
To take it, and because they thought it was cold.
We're helping. That's right.
So another question is, where's the corral?
Oh. Well, there is that turnoff to the Lamar Valley where there is that. I think they've got a corral there. Yeah.
And then my all-time favorite, at what elevation do deer turn into elk?
Really? That's That's classic.
That's my all-time favorite.
Yeah, that's great. At
Like,
what elevation?
Magically, they turn into elk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yellowstone story that just killed me one time was when I was driving. Andrea was in the car with me. I think we had her mom with us, and we were driving around Yellowstone Lake at dusk. And we came around where the road starts to bend to the south because there's that, the road goes along the east side of the lake there. And a few cars were pulled over looking at something. And so we pulled in behind one of them, and we looked over to our right, which was between the road and the shore of the lake. And there was a pretty good-sized grizzly, probably 3 years old, just pawing at the dirt, making a bunch of dust. And there were all these people standing outside their cars, literally on the edge of the road. And they were just watching this grizzly and just engaged fully and just amazed at the fact that there was this bear. And I kid you not, that bear was probably 50 yards away from them. And it was insane. And so we were talking about it, and my wife said, "You have to get out of the car and go tell them to get in their cars." And I thought, you got to be kidding me, but it felt like the right thing to do. So, I get out of the car. I think I had some bear spray with me, and I start yelling at everybody. And I said, "You guys get in your cars. Get in your cars. You have no idea how fast these things are. You need to get in your cars." And this little boy that was outside of his car,
Of course,
maybe 6 or 7 years old, looks at me and says, "That's my mom. You can't talk to her like that." But slowly, people started paying attention, and they walked to their cars and got in. And I kid you not, right after everyone was in their cars and cars barely started moving, that thing took off like a bolt.
Yeah.
Straight from where it was, across the road, straight up the mountainside. And nobody knew it was going to do that, and nobody knew how fast it was, but it was quick.
Well, and it's also funny because it's amazing to me every year, without fail, somebody walks up to a full-blown male bison thinking, I don't know, they can get their picture taken next to it.
Oh, yeah, selfie or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Here you have like probably 1,500 to 2,000 pound full bore animal that can just wheel at a dime and tear you into shreds.
Yeah.
It's something else to behold. Every year there's something that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Some elk will nail somebody.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So Yellowstone, yeah. So what's the big debate now? I mean, are farmers banding together? And I know several farmers I've heard of they'll just shoot them on sight and not say a word to anybody, and they'll just bury it. They won't even say anything.
Yeah. Well, and ranchers, if they see one, they're more prone to do the 3 S's, shoot, shovel, and shut up.
Yeah.
Which is...
Can't blame them.
Can't blame them.
I mean, that's your livelihood.
Yeah.
Better to make the phone call.
Right. I mean, the nice thing is they're starting to issue permits, to go out and hunt wolves. How much of an impact that will have, I don't think anybody has any idea at this point.
Right. Now, there's a difference. If I see a wolf, if I own a bunch of cattle and I'm outside one day and I see a wolf running through the property, quite a ways from the animals, I'll be guarded, but I'm not going to just get in my truck and go after it and kill it. No. But at the same time, if it's lurking within the herd, it's got to go. So.
Well, and I think you'll start seeing a lot more incidental type permits, where people will get like a wolf permit to go with their deer and their elk permit. And then if they happen to come across a wolf, then they'll legally take the wolf, just as part of their permitting system.
Right. And the good thing about that is that unlike our deer friends,
yes,
a wolf will not carry chronic wasting disease.
This is true.
Which we talked about last time.
That is very true.
Yeah. So I had an item of pop culture.
All right.
That just the more I've done the research and listened to the interviews and the deposition footage and testimony from people that were her closest employees, the whole Elizabeth Holmes thing with Theranos just blows my mind.
Have you watched the documentary yet?
Not yet, but it's fascinating, and it's really clearly she's nuts, and she's narcissistic, and she's almost sociopathic.
Yes,
I think. However, I really believe that the media play a much bigger role in helping to create these people than they want to realize.
100% agree with you.
If Steve Jobs had not been celebrated so much for simply walking out on a stage in a black turtleneck and everyone saying, wow, look at that guy. He's running this huge successful tech company. He's got more money than the U.S. government, which may not be fair because they're just in debt, but he's got a ton of cash, and he's just this innovative, altruistic guy who, from everything I've read, was a lot more of a jerk than people might know. But they put him up on this pedestal for behaving in a certain way. And then all of a sudden, you've got this 19-year-old gal who's going to Stanford who drops out, and that's what she's often referred to as the dropout, because it romanticizes the notion that you can quit a formal education and go off on your own and start something big and something amazing, which is absolutely possible, but not probable. So you've got this gal who had a wonderful idea, the idea of you take just a few drops of blood and you toss it into this machine. What's the machine called? Oh, it's called the Edison. Lo and behold, we've got yet another powerful, emotion-evoking name associated with this invention. And she puts on the turtleneck. She walks around. She acts like she's Steve Jobs, basically. And she lowers her voice.
Yes.
Lowers her voice so she can sound a little more authoritative and so forth.
Blew my mind when I watched the interviews with her, where I was like, that is very fascinating.
And very bogus.
Well, very bogus, but the fascinating thing was, to your point, the media, I believe, definitely had an interesting impact on how she got who she did for her board.
Oh, yeah.
Because you look at her board, these were military men.
Kissinger. Schultz.
You even had Mattis on her board.
Yeah.
It was astonishing.
A bunch of old white men.
Yeah. And what even was more impressive was how they did not ask the questions. Like, show us the machine.
Yeah.
Show us it actually doing what it's supposed to.
Right.
Not only did the board not ask that question, Walgreens didn't ask that question.
Right.
They just said, oh,
well,
sure.
She's on the cover of every magazine, and everyone's too busy kissing her feet to do anything else. And it's just unfortunate. And for anyone who's not done any reading or YouTube watching on this whole Theranos company debacle, highly recommended. It to her, the appearance of the dream,
yes,
far outweighed the value of achieving the dream. And she just took that on the road and sold the snot out of it. And it was fooled everybody.
More fascinating when she was being told by people internal to her own company, this isn't going as well as you think it is.
Right.
And things aren't going as you've anticipated they go. And she ignored them.
Well, and she told them to shut up and keep lying, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You weren't part of the, ideation culture that she was trying to have.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, if you're doing lab work for patients, there is a certain amount of, you need the science before you do any of the ideation side of it.
Yeah.
If that's not working out, then your ideas, to your point, are coming out of this sociopathic realm where it's like the more you talk about it that isn't real, the worse it's getting.
Yes. It's quite interesting. It's an absolute study.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I was on the periphery of that. I wasn't reading about it, and then after I watched the documentary, I started reading about it, and I went, amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. Just like her.
Exactly.
And now she and her ex are facing criminal charges.
We'll see where this goes.
Yeah.
I will be very interested to see where this goes.
I doubt anything's really going to happen with criminal charges, but you never know.
I mean, civil suits, because there's plenty of patients who got results. You know, those results are in question at this point.
Oh, they're all bogus, and everyone knows it. But yeah, some lady had results that her cancer was back.
Yeah.
And then she got retested with her doctor, and the doctor's like, "No, you're fine." But yeah, it's remarkable.
Yeah. So,
thinking what else is going on. Teenagers are always happening for us.
Teenagers are happening.
They are.
Nailing Jello to a tree is the equivalent of having a teenager.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't know which way it's going to go, and you don't know whether it's going to stay or drop.
Yeah.
At any moment.
That's true.
It's like riding a roller coaster every day.
We need to do a podcast about having teenagers. Because there aren't any others.
Right.
There's a million.
Exactly.
But there's only one Bullwhackers.
That is true.
So, with that in mind, we will thank you for joining us, and hope you learned something. And most of you know us, so if you got any topics you want us to debate or discuss,